School of the Arts here in Denver, Colorado. Today we will be talking about creating works that demonstrate drawing skills. So what will we learn? First, let's define the elements that readers will focus on when examining the artwork. These include mark making. Drawing at its core is all about making marks. What constitutes strong mark making? Line. Line is used to define space or direct the movement of the viewer's eyes. How can line be used effectively within your ideas? Surface. How can informed decisions about surface best accentuate your choice of materials and techniques? Space. Space refers to the distance between, around, and within things. Space can be positive or negative and includes the background, foreground, and middle ground. Light and shade are what visually define objects. Values are used to translate light and shade, creating the illusion of something three-dimensional. And composition. Composition refers to how the elements of art are arranged within this space. So let's take a look at a few examples. First, let's explore a familiar and often used subject in the human eye. Both of these works demonstrate excellent technical skill, but how? First, there are many ways to establish excellent mark making. In this work, the student demonstrates the ability to render work almost photographically, where the marks are purposefully undefined. The student uses line in various capacities, including representation, as well as careful integration of new ideas such as a leaf. Notice in the first image how the student makes an informed decision to render the veins of a leaf to follow the angle of the eye, creating a strong sense of movement and balance. The student has used a clean, smooth surface, which has helped to achieve the photographic representation of the work. Considering their mark making, this was a strong decision to achieve the desired results. Notice how the student has decided to fill the space with mark making. While negative space can be an important aspect of many drawings, this student still has a strong variety of values and line weight to ensure that the work does not become too busy. The student has demonstrated a broad range of values, creating a strong sense of contrast. Encourage students to get out of the midtones. It can be scary for young artists to push darker values. Consider having them taking a before and after photo of their work so they can see the difference side by side. And although both of these compositions have eyes in the center of the page, notice how they have shifted in each work. In the top image, the eye is looking up, shifting balance, but the strong line weight of the most pronounced vein shifts weight back to center. In the bottom image, the pupil pulls weight to the right of the composition, but the inclusion of the paper boat in the lower left pulls weight back to center. Let's move to a very different, yet also excellent demonstration of drawing skill. While our first image was incredibly clean, this work has mark making that might be described as more expressive. While this may translate as messy to inexperienced students, the expressive marks are clearly intentional and are used to create a sense of atmosphere. The student does an excellent job of balancing a variety of line work. Notice how line is used to move the eyes of the viewer from the lower left-hand corner of the work to the upper right-hand corner. While the first images of eyes were done on a clean, smooth surface to accentuate the desired technique, this work seems to be done on a surface with additional tooth or texture. This decision helps to emphasize the expressive and almost gestural mark making demonstrated in the piece. As with the first set of works, this piece utilizes both positive and negative space effectively. The higher concentration of marks as we move to the upper right-hand corner gives a sense of vast distance through the space. Again, notice the broad range of values evident in the work. We see very dark darks, very light lights, and a wide variety of midtones. And finally, the composition has a strong sense of movement, yet maintains balance throughout. Notice how the wealth of darker values along the top and the top left of the page are balanced out by the larger shapes and slightly darker values in the bottom right. In our third example, we see strong representational drawing skills, yet the student stops short of fully rendering the entire composition. Here, the student has demonstrated both highly skilled representational rendering as well as more gestural marks. The combination of mark-making decision makes for dynamic work and demonstrates confidence. While the fully rendered areas make it purposefully difficult to discern specific line, the economized areas allow us to see intentionality in the direction and concentration of marks. Notice the diagonal lines and hatching in the areas of cloth behind the figure. As with the previous works, the surface may indicate texture, but additionally, the decision to use a colored surface plays a huge part in the way this work is expressed. Notice the use of space within this piece, specifically the rendered and economized areas of the work. Would this work have been as successful if the background had been left completely blank? What if the background had been fully rendered? This work also demonstrates an impressive range of values. Sometimes this can be difficult for students to see when color is added to the equation. Consider photographing the work and adding a black and white filter or printing it in black and white. Can you still see rich darks, light lights, a variety of midtones? Sometimes all it takes is a small change to balance out a composition. Notice how much weight is in the lower left-hand corner of the work. The small area of rich values and color in the upper right-hand corner is just enough to balance out the composition. Abstract work may seem like anyone can do it, but to create successful abstract drawings can be very difficult. Consider the mark making in both of these works. Each one demonstrates expressive marks in different ways. Remember, it's not just what the marks look like. It's also important to consider how the marks were created. The work on the left was created with more traditional tools, while the image on the right was created with molten glass drizzled on wood to create abstract expressionist work. As such, each work has very different approaches to line. The work on the left uses a wide variety of line weight as well as mark-making tools, while the lines on the right may have been largely dictated by movement speed and distance from the surface when the glass was drizzled. One can imagine the practice and revision it must have taken to understand how to achieve certain lines. Here, the piece on the left uses a more traditional surface, but the layering involved with the work suggests a high level of manipulation. The work on the right may represent surface as necessity. Imagine what molten glass might have done to paper. In these works, we see two very different approaches to space, with the work on the left creating a highly saturated space and the image on the right utilizing a great deal of negative space. Consider how important it was for the artists on the left to leave areas of negative space around the very edges of the work. For the piece on the right, would it have been as successful if they had included marks throughout the entire composition? Examining the work on the left, look closely at the layering and consider how the artist may have worked through the process. For example, if you look at the block C shape towards the center of the composition, it looks like it was one of the last layers added. Before it was included, could you see a solid representation of the light end of the value spectrum? Do you think this was intentionally considered? Again, while these two works are very different compositionally, they work for reasons based on informed decisions. For the work on the left, consider the balance between light and dark values, variety of line weight, and concentration of marks. For the work on the right, why is the negative space so integral to the composition? Do the two small lines towards the upper right help? How? So, let's take a few minutes to practice. As we look at the next few slides, please pause the image and consider all of the drawing skills you see addressed in the work. Please pause this video now and resume when you're finished. We'll go over some, if not all, of the drawing skills evident. Can we see examples of strong mark making? Do these marks do a good job of accentuating the subject matter? Do we see a variety of line weight? Do these lines successfully define the subjects and ideas? Is there a fully considered and developed surface? Are elements of positive and negative space utilized to consider the imagery within the work? Has the artist used light and shade to visually define the objects? Is there a successful illusion of something three-dimensional? And has the artist created an effective and well-balanced composition using these elements and principles to design? In all cases, yes. This is an excellent example of drawing skill. Again, please pause this video now and resume when you're finished. We'll go over some, if not all, of the drawing skills evident. Again, let's consider issues such as mark making, line, surface, space, light and shade, and composition. If this work looks familiar, it's from the same sustained investigation we examined earlier. It's important to note that each individual work is not scored. Instead, the body of work is scored based on skill demonstrated throughout all of the work. So, what should we take away from this? Some things to consider when looking to demonstrate skill within the drawing portfolio. Remember, drawing at its core is all about making marks. How will your marks best synthesize with your ideas and materials with the marks you make? How can you convey confidence through these marks? Lines are used to define space or direct the movement of the viewer's eyes. As the artist, you are the director. How do you define your space? How do you want to direct the viewer's eyes? Was your choice of surface arbitrary or based on what might work best with the materials and ideas? Make informed decisions when considering the surface that will best accentuate your work and your materials and mark-making techniques. How have you utilized the space in your surface? Remember, negative space is absolutely as important as positive. Consider issues such as figure-ground relationships and balance. How have you used light and shadow to define your objects? Have you addressed a broad range of values? It's easy to get stuck in the midtones, so remember, push both ends of the spectrum. And finally, consider how you have arranged the elements within your space to create cohesive and balanced work. Composition in many ways is the sum of all the parts we've addressed. Thanks again for joining AP Daily, and we look forward to seeing you again.